nice to see so many friends and familiar faces having signed up. I think of Carmen Boullosa as one of the most important Mexican writers today. In fact, writers today. And Carmen, you've written about so many different scenes, epics, tableaus, ancient Egypt, the Texas-Mexican War, pirates, just so many different periods, and now you're in Russia in 1905, and I have to say that this book feels different from your other books. It's equally playful the way you always are, but and I should have mentioned you've also written science fiction in the future, but it's there's an undertow of sadness, you might say, or of almost political despair, because you placed this in Russia in 1905 during the uprising led by Father Gapon, and of course it did not have a happy consequence. So I can't help wondering what you see as the connection between present-day politics and this particular political story that you were trying to tell.
Wonderful provocation and question, Philip. Thanks so much, and thanks McNally for receiving us, the bookstore, bookstores I love. Thanks, friends, for joining us here. I'm so happy to have at least a screen party for our book. I'm extremely happy to see you here. Philip, I think it is a very wise question. I would have never thought I was going to write about that moment. There was something happening in Mexico those precise months or years when I was dreaming of retelling the story, rewriting the novel that Tolstoy said Anna Karenina had written. And I also was obsessed about what was going on in Mexico, a certain kind of social tension, a certain kind of hope that was a little bit too furious to be really hopeful. Mm-hmm. A certain kind of una crispación is said in English, a certain kind of tension. Everybody was tense, irritable. There was like an undertone of violence on everything, which is not normally the Mexican mood. So it was, I saw it in the news, and every time I touched base or I stayed some time in Mexico, I felt this atmosphere that was for me so unknown in many ways, unknown. It was like my own, my hometown, where I grew up, where I always feel I'm at home, and I felt not at home. It was a very strange feeling. While at the same time I was rewriting in verse. First I did it, then with another kind of narrator, then having another kind of protagonist to think what had been the book that Anna Karenina had written.
Could I ask you something about that?
Yes, of course.
You know, it's been 5 years since I reread Anna Karenina, and I don't remember, was there a mention in the novel of that Anna was writing a novel?
I obviously didn't remember it when I reread Anna Karenina, and not only didn't remember it, but I had never heard anybody mention the passage or underline the mention to the book of Anna Karenina. It's mentioned in two different settings by Tolstoy. First, in between her brother and the alter ego of Tolstoy. They are having a conversation. They start talking about Anna Karenina, and while talking about Karenina, they say, the brother says she wrote a book, and the book is very good. It's been read, the book, by X, who is a writer, so it's good, and also a publisher. It's a good book. He wants to publish it. I've read it too. It's a very good book. It's intended, he says, for young readers. It's a book, a book to say so. It's a book for young readers.
So in a way, you're channeling Anna Karenina's book. You're channeling Anna more than you're channeling Tolstoy.
Of course, what I wanted was the book that Tolstoy just shows us or
alluded to. Yeah.
Yes, and then he takes it away. The book never appears, and I couldn't avoid thinking, well, if she had her book published, her life would have been different, because she was the talk of the town. Everybody was talking about her. If the book had been printed, the book would possibly have been a success. And if the book would have been a success, she would have had another kind of life, social life.
Yeah, she would become another boring writer like us.
No, I think not a boring writer, because she was already so glamorous. She was glamorous.
Yeah,
there was something on her like different. She was different from the other women. The way Tolstoy describes her and the attraction she causes on everybody, I don't think she would have been a boring writer like us. I think she would have been the sexiest woman in town.
So she's another one of your figures like Cleopatra, another diva in a way.
She's, I imagined, of course she is not, but I imagined her story would have been so different. A, she would have been a star, and B, she would have had a room of her own. She would have earned money of her own. I imagined. I mean, I was like making that plot inside of me. But the book had to be that. What was that book that I thought was going to be a success? So I tried to do a book that was like for young people, and I wrote it in verse, but it didn't. I tried to please my fantasy, but in reality, my fantasy and my pen are always pleasing something else. It's so strange, because the pen of a fiction writer, instead of pleasing oneself, if you are an honest writer, you are like the voice of the tribe. You are not, yes, the books are very personal. Yes, they are what one dreams of being, but they are written, if they are honest, they have to do always with this collective thing that is language. Because
and by the way, you have a lot of in this book, which is about 160 pages. It's almost a novella. Beautifully translated, by the way, by Samantha Schnee.
Very beautifully.
Very beautifully translated. There are so many characters, and there's particularly a kind of a spectrum of women characters. You have the activist bomb thrower, Clementine. You have the contented bourgeois wife, Claudia. You have Anya, who was Anna Karenina's daughter. And you have various, Alexandra is three, in fact. So in a way, you're giving us all these different representations of possibilities for women characters. Yeah.
Maybe I knew very well that I was not giving back Anna Karenina the book she wanted to write, but the book that I made her write, the book out of her desperation, maybe she didn't rewrite the manuscript that everybody had read, but the two characters or three characters that have read it. Maybe it always kept being, I don't know what. But I gave her the book I imagined she wrote in her desperation. And maybe what I gave her to pay back my my exchange were a lot of women to talk with. And yes, it's a book full of women.
It's a book
And
full of
then,
women.
yes, well, not only, we also have some men, no?
You have
Father
some men. I mean, the main male character is Sergei, the son of Anna Karenina, and his dilemma, his anguish is that he's a fictional character surrounded by real people, um, and he uh, and he's very embarrassed by this, and he's very embarrassed by the fact that everyone is always discussing his mother close by, or this fallen woman and this sensational person. Um, and part of what the dilemma you describe is that because he was written about by Tolstoy, he can't. His past is fixed, and in a way that fixes him. So it makes him very static, and he's very frustrated by being a fictional character. One of the things that's remarkable about the book is that you manage somehow to mix, they're all fictional, obviously, but to mix characters that you've made up as real people and characters who are aware of themselves as fictional characters because they've stepped out of Tolstoy's novel. Um, and they're all interacting with each other. And how did you pull that off? I don't understand.
I don't think it was my fault. I think that also that kind of bubbling thing that was happening around in Mexico that pulled me to that moment with Father Gapon in a universe I didn't know, that I had to kind of study and try to capture. I think that exercise of translation, to say so, between what I felt was then the atmosphere of my homeland and and what had happened in reality in that past. I think that in that movement, the characters decided to wake up. They caught me by surprise in a way. Then, of course, I had to try to control them and try to put everyone in place and set them in my game, in my deck. But they suddenly, they all started this incredible miracle that is suddenly the imagination that that brings literature and that brings being what you called a boring writer. This
Yeah, I mean, I think
wave that comes here, and then suddenly I had all this, and my only deal there was like, let's try to make them all put them all in place here. And they were all these and voices, and they were speaking, and I had so much fun when that finally happened. I had not been having fun for 2 years when I was stubbornly trying to write the book of Anna Karenina, and I was being very disciplined, and I was trying to understand, and I was reading her contemporaries when she was in theory alive, and what was her city, and all that I had been doing by discipline maybe only prepared me, but maybe not. Maybe the discipline was just, I don't know, but it was not discipline.
But they took over, because it's sort of like those old cartoons, Winston McKay, where the character jumps out of the ink bottle and starts prancing around and starts becoming real. But I think that you also gave them real feelings. So it wasn't just, let's say, a postmodernist joke. You gave them feelings. You gave them suffering. That's so. Everybody, in a way, in the novel is suffering. The real characters and the ones who came out of a novel.
Everybody was suffering, but me. Maybe everybody was suffering. Everybody was suffering. They were having a terrible moment, and I was having a lot of fun.
You were having fun. Because
I was having fun, but it was not a joke. I mean, I did sympathize for them. I got very excited with things that happened to them. I may say that I should Mike might be listening over there and he will pardon my confession, but it was like I slept with Anna Karenina. Not only with her, they were also intimate for me, and I kind of smelled them. Even the tsar, when I finally put him in the bathtub, before doing that, I was so close to him.
Oh yeah, there's all in the bathtub. He's having these airhead thoughts, you might say. But about the actual center of the book, which is the protest, the strike, and so on. You have different, all of these political strategies and tactics that you're writing about, like Clementine wants to throw bombs and has no compunction about killing people. Father Gapon, who was a real historical figure, is basically marching his supporters into the slaughter. And he thinks, well, if a lot of people die, that will change people's minds. So these different tactics, and there's a lot of discussion about tactics and also about how to improve the workers' lot. There's a very serious political dimension that's going on at the same time as all of these kinds of narrative tricks. Like, you write part of it in present tense, and we're following along as so we're reading a realistic novel. Then you
yes. Sorry, no, it's very peculiar because I said I had a lot of fun, but having fun doesn't mean that you are playing something insignificant. I was so full of their lives, so full of them, in the best possible way. I was really enjoying that very difficult party, to say it, because it's not a party. We know that it's not a party what's happening there. Serious things are happening there. Some people are being killed, and as somebody's losing his sister, his brother. It's a tragedy. Nevertheless, I had this feeling of being part of them. Or I shouldn't maybe talk of that feeling, because maybe that is a little bit ridiculous, in the sense that in reality, when you are a novelist, you are not writing about your feelings, you are writing about them.
Yeah, feeling.
The pleasure of writing about them and really being close to them and studying the cases. Of course I had to study the cases. I was not going to play something that was me not knowing what was going on. I had to understand. I got fascinated by the character of Father Gapon, even though, and I got fascinated even by the tsar, which even though
right.
More reluctancy, I say it, and by Sergei, obviously, even though he's so unsatisfied with his own life. I was not unsatisfied with his life.
Right.
I thought it was so wonderful to make a real character out of somebody that has already been pre-written. So he can't rewrite his, though he's living in a future, he's only a character of the past, of what has been written. So of course there's all over there an idea of, I think it is in a way a serious philosophical book, novel, but fiction has this, that it offers you the chance to explore
right.
intellectually.
And for instance, you talk about how the historians have dealt with this period. So then you become sort of like a researcher. You're no longer the novelist. You suddenly talk about, well, there are various historical interpretations of this moment, and so you break the realistic frame in a way. You keep doing that, and then you keep moving chronologically. So the book manages to be a realistic study of a series of characters and a historical moment, and a kind of playful, postmodernist moving around, as though we can no longer write realistic novels anymore. Do you have that feeling? We have to We have to,
I would prefer to be a 19th century character. If I was going to say, am I postmodernist or I'm a 19th century character, or am I a 21st century character, I would choose the 19th century. And I think that giving that importance to fiction, that's what the book in a way does. Yes, I needed the historical, I needed even the judge eye to get it, to understand where I was, where the characters were moving. And I needed to read, I mean, I had to read things to understand what was going on. Nevertheless, I am a 19th century character, and I believe that fiction is so transformative, and that fiction is against Sergei, because Sergei, in a sense, is much more 21st century than me, because he's so worried about being a fiction character, while I am pleased to be among fiction characters. Of course, I prefer to be the writer than them, because as the writer, you can be several ones. You are not condemned
yes.
to your own self. You are all and one self is so boring, and the others are so full of new things that one can see. So maybe that appetite for the others, and maybe it's what
Well,
fed, or or maybe it's why I love to write novels, and I also love to read history, honestly. And I'm married to a historian, as you know, and I'm interested about his historian point of view, that whatever he's writing, and every time he tells me or I read what he's been writing about, I then escaped into another path.
yes.
And I get into another side, and I suddenly, like, all that is only like the bones, but what I care about is the body, and the body is fictional.
Well, speaking of the body, you have many descriptions of dresses and of food. Were you researching this kind of thing? What they might have been wearing, what they might have been eating?
I love dresses, not for me, but for my characters. And I'm obsessed by that theme. And hair, what about hair? So I was looking at paintings, photographs, descriptions. And then I always go into things that then I say, how on earth could I care about reading about fashion of X moment? And I was so interested about it. But in this case, in this precise book, I think that to nourish the erotical side of Anna's manuscript, or what I thought it ended being, that, by the way, it's, I think, an erotical tale. I needed bodies, food, table, dresses, because skirts, what skirts have, what gives sense to skirts is the body that can move underneath, the body that is not just tied or nude, because then if it's nude, it might become invisible. So yes, very important. And food is always important, Philip, not only for that novel.
There's also a lot about this painting of Anna Karenina. And a lot of the book, I think one of the main themes of the book has to do with art, and representations, artistic representations. It's funny that it sort of takes off from Tolstoy, because in a way it reminded me more of Joseph Conrad than Tolstoy, because books like Under Western Eyes or The Secret Agent, the sense of conspiracy, of anarchists and so on, was more Conrad.
I couldn't avoid reread Conrad, evidently, with his anarchists and the bomb. And of course, yes, you are totally right. Maybe I was closer in many ways to other writers than Tolstoy. I was not close to Tolstoy. Right. Even Anna herself was not getting me closer to him. And I was so mad at him that he had just passed like this her book in front of me and taking it out. The minute I saw the book, it poisoned me against Tolstoy. So strange. I can't explain that, but it was like, how come he shows the book is there and then the book is
So
taken away?
maybe you're getting back at Tolstoy, you know. I mean, I have to admit that when I read it the last time, I got very involved in Karenin, in the husband, you know. It's like, so the way you got involved with Sergei, you know, it's like, you know, we start to wonder about these people who have been overshadowed by Anna Karenina. You know?
But we have talked about Mr. Karenin, you and me, and we both like him a lot. I
Yes.
do like him a lot, much more than Bronsky.
Yes.
I found Bronsky so boring. And Karenin is an incredibly interesting character, and how he moves along the Anna Karenina book in such a delicate and real way. One feels and one lives with him so close in Tolstoy's book. Now, in my book, when the characters were getting alive inside my book, he was extremely marginal.
But you talk about how you go into the future of Vronsky and how he died and how he's been made into a legend, but he actually died in a very silly way, according to you. Yes.
It's my little vengeance against Bronsky. I am sure he died in a silly way. He had to die in a silly way because he was a silly man. And so the only other way that I could really have him, like I felt he could maybe flourish, was playing cards. There maybe he had the intuition of the person who knows how to read luck and read the others with whom he is playing. But I don't think he was good at that either, as we know how he lost money when he was playing. So he had to die a silly way, and yes, he dies in a super silly way that's going to be hid by the mother and by everybody, because silliness is really shameful.
So your book is both an imaginative reconstruction, and it's also a kind of piece of literary criticism, kind of a critical analysis of the novel. You know, would you like to read a few minutes from the book?
Of course, I would love to read some few minutes of the book, but the story of being a literary critic inside the book, I don't know. I think that no real writer can be not a reader. So I was trying to be a reader, but as you noted, not only of Tolstoy, but I was being a reader of Pushkin, of Conrad, going again to him, and of poets. I was looking for who could guide me, who could feed me. And one walks with the eyes as a writer. So I had thought, first I thought of reading, but as you mentioned the portrait, I'm going to go for that fragment.
Okay.
It's 29, it's almost at the very middle of the book. It's a bit more than the middle if we want to be fair. Sergei has seen Mikhailov's portrait of Anna Karenina only once. The lighting wasn't ideal. Sergei was still a boy, despite everyone insisting he was already a man. He was on the way home from school. The Countess Vronskaya sent the portrait at the precise hour she thought Sergei would arrive. She had planned this carefully. It was her revenge against the son of the woman who had ruined her own. The portrait was borne by one of the Countess's servants, dressed impeccably in French livery, followed by two others not quite so well dressed. Although she was rich, the Countess Vronskaya counted every ruble. Her servants lived with their bellies half empty, and creditors had to call on her 3 or 4 times before she could part with a single kopeck. Rich but stingy, she squandered her wealth on frivolities, such as a feather from the farthest corner of the universe to replace the one on a hat she despised, Turkish delights from smugglers, which she shared with no one, fine Belgian lace miniatures she caressed with her fingertips before putting them away in drawers to keep them from being ruined, or French bonbons. The footman in elegant French livery held the portrait of Anna Karenina by its gold leaf frame, perhaps an excessive impulse of Bronsky's that, to a finer eye, didn't complement the delicate color of Anna's dress. This is like a little nightmare, but we'll leave it right there. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. That is bad. But that is reality. That is zooming. I think really this pandemic, well, we are still quarantined in Mexico, but it's not a perfect environment for having a total intimacy in so many ways. I don't know if you all feel that, but I feel that the line between intimacy and the public eye and has vanished. So like, as a writer, I always work at home. That is true. But I always do things as a writer outside home, like reading from my book to others. So to do this kind of crossing, sorry, now I left my reading aside because I remembered one obsession that has been clicking in my head these days. This crossing between my intimate world, my privacy, and then outside, I don't know what new lovers are doing with these dates. It's so difficult. How do they create that space of privacy? I read when it's very late in the night, when everybody is asleep, when the musician is not playing in the street, when the phone, of course, won't read, when Mike is already asleep, when everybody is gone. And then I can take out the book and I can start reading. Because for reading, you also need privacy. So sorry, this is a gap. Maybe I don't have permission to go back to reading, Philip.
We're going to wind it up in a little bit because we need to take questions from our listeners.
Okay.
But I do. I just wonder. You know, you're in Mexico City, but you must be aware of all the demonstrations in the United States around George Floyd's death. And so, do you think this is a moment like 1905 Russia, where the, the first efforts toward a kind of revolution are occurring?
I like that reflection, Philip, but I think this is a very different moment because I think that those people that were demonstrating, aside Father Gapon, they were all having a very intense collective life to then gather in, and they had these meetings all collective, and they were thinking collectively, not in the web. And they were also living in terrible conditions collectively. I think the novel captures that, or I thought I showed it. Right. And then collectively, because they are already like embodied in one body, collectively, they go for a change. And in this case, this has been, this racist, intolerable system has been there for decades. And then it happens that quarantine, all people isolated, the video we all saw only with our eyes. Right. We all saw it. We were so furious. And then the kind of movement to go out, I think it's totally different. I think the atmosphere is other, completely different. And in a way, that kind of movement, I think, can bring an incredibly productive change in the American society. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think it has been more like a pressure cooker movement. While I do think that what happened, at least in that demonstration of Father Gapon, they worked to get the pressure together. It was not one incident and not them all held before, but it was in the what I capture in the novel. The story that comes later is different, but this is so different.
You know, one of the things you point out in the novel is that um, Father Gapon and his followers, they still revered the Tsar almost like a living god, you know, and and it was actually in the Bloody Sunday that they were able to see that maybe, you know, they were thinking that everything that was bad in Russian society was not because of the Tsar, but because of his underlings. And finally, they had to realize that the trouble started at the top, that it included their adored Tsar, you know. So I don't think we're in that situation right now with our president. No.
No, I really don't see the, I wouldn't, I think, well, in so many ways, it's like we are living in a world we never imagined was going to happen, in the best and in the worst, meaning the coronavirus, we didn't expect this pandemic, though the experts knew whatever it is, but as all together we didn't expect. But even less so, we didn't think this was going to have then these demonstrations. So immediately, so this moment, the unexpected, it's a, I am unable to talk about it. I haven't digested it. I always need time to digest.
Well, we said they're living.
Yes, but I'm 19th century, and I have a different clock.
Carmen, I'm 18th century, so I'm 100 years behind you.
I am not so sure, Philip. I thought you were 17th.
So, no, 18th century.
Okay. Okay.
Samuel Johnson. Okay. Shall we invite our audience to ask questions or comment?
Sure. I have a question, and I also wanted to say that I'm sort of glad the phone rang as an interim events manager, because it instigated, you were able to put language to something that I thought was really beautiful and true about Zoom and privacy and all the rest. So I'm glad the phone rang. And I do only have one question, so there may be time for you to resume your reading. But my question is, you talked about reading Pushkin and Conrad. I was wondering if there were any novels you read that were instructive for you in terms of what you were doing in the Book of Anna, reanimating a canonical world. When I first read about it, the first book I thought of was Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. That was the only book I could sort of think to compare it to, or was relative to it. Were there any novels that helped you figure out what you were trying to do in the Book of Anna?
Honestly, not. It's very peculiar. Of course, I love the idea of you thinking of a novel I love and thinking it has something in common. But it does happen to me that after reading about the theme or reading authors I think I can steal from or observe from, or that I need to reread that passage of Conrad or the whole, or return again obsessively to Tolstoy's correspondence, or whatever I needed then to read. Then what happens to me in the moment I am figuring everything, I click into poetry and I only read poems. Only read poems. And then I start reading them like a mad woman. I read them like in a torrent. I go like not trying to stop, like if they were my music, like if I took out all the sense from them and I just needed the sound. Is so peculiar. And then comes something. And of course, here people walk, talk about nothing that has to do with the book. That's so important. And then something shapes. But I have never till now worked on a novel like trying to get the order of another novelist. I have done several times in a novel, stole a character from a novel. I did it here with several characters. And I did it with even Cervantes. I stole a character from him and I told the story totally different. Or I steal a scene. But what you, I think, mean is the structure, what people call the structure, the body, and what pulls it and what gives it some order. And that I don't, because mainly I think as a very young writer, a poet, or when I started publishing, I was a poet, I still think that what you want to say has to correspond identically with the form of the book. The like form and what it is inside and what it means, they all have to go together. Like in a poem, that in a poem you can never say, well, you know, the structure of the poem and take it outside from what it means, because the best poets, you read them and the verse is giving you the whole picture. I think a novel has to be like that. So I go into the just feeding myself with listening to my poets that I love, rereading them, but like going like a kind of crazy, that gives me the music to tune into the book. And that book, every book has a different structure if it's, I think, an honest book. But the structure, then you have to tell the book, well, how don't I destroy you? How do I pull it up? How do I make it not be, make it be? They are more real than us. We were talking about characters that are fiction and characters that are real. I think that the most real part of a book is the book.
That's beautiful.
That is so real. And as reality, we know that reality never has a real rationale. Reality is per se irrational. There's something inherently chaotic. And of course, to go through it, there has to be a coherence. I think it's kind of that experience. So I don't look at a book and I say, I'm going to do this or that. Then I go into this listening, and it's discovering what's the book about. I have said it, and I hate to repeat myself, but I have said sometimes that a writer is more like an archaeologist than a student of literature. The archaeologist that is digging and finding a body there, a real object there, a real body there, and you have to only don't destroy it. And it's already like built. I know that the word miraculous has not a beautiful perfume, but may I say it is like miraculous. The book is suddenly there. And you are like yes, doing your tool, saying, I may not destroy it, and this goes here, and this goes there. And then, of course, some parts are broken when you discover them. So you have to fix them intelligently, make them then work without what was holding them.
Do you have any questions or comments?
We've got one from Samantha. Carmen, can you tell us about how you conceived of the Book of Anna, meaning the one that Anna has written, and whether the writing of that part of the novel was different from the story of what's happening in the Karenin Palace, where the manuscript is discovered?
Well, that is the question of the other writer of this book, that is Samantha Shin, the translator. The Book of Anna is completely different. It's like all the rest of all my novel is the crust of her book. The crust is set in next historical moment where I have the fiction characters, the real, the historical characters, living in a plot that has a pre-written end because it's historical. And the Book of Anna instead is the manuscript that I imagine she rewrote when she was gone. She had gone crazy. She was using too much laudanus, opium, to sleep, to wake up, to feel more or less okay. She had lost it. She was unsatisfied. She was possibly bored. She could not connect with her newly baby, well, no longer a baby, but a toddler, her daughter. And she really didn't like anymore much Vronsky. The best way to express it was being jealous. So then she goes into this wild writing that expresses her erotical insatisfaction, her sexual insatisfaction, her erotic need, her self going all this in opium, the non-sleeping, the waking up for out of time, is a totally different story. And that's what I decided was her book, or the book that my novel decided that was her book. It is written totally different. It has like another pulse, like another ink, like another pen. I still handwrite all my books. Like
Definitely in a different register, yes.
A totally different register, even like another handwriting, another perfume. Yes, it's like another writer. And I think that the parts of the beauty of being a novelist and of being my age and having written so many novels is that you then can have different hands. But it's not like you put a robot hand in you and it's no longer you, it's you, but you have other hands. It was me who wrote the book of Anna Karenina, but I had other hands. My hands were Anna Karenina's. I had stolen her hands from the day I was with her. I already confessed I was loyal to my husband with Anna Karenina. When I was in bed with her, I took out her hands from her and they were my hands. I had the hands of my Anna. And that's the hands that wrote that. But the other part of the book, no, the other part of the book was my Mexican me, my most Mexican me.
You know, I was reading a lot of Maria Tsvetaeva recently. You know, the Russian poet Maria Tsvetaeva.
I love her.
Yeah, and I was wondering about this kind of writing that's right at the edge, to use a 19th century word, close to hysteria, and what the overlap was between that Russian sensibility and the Mexican sensibility, if any.
It depends what part of Mexico, may I say. Mexico City, we are it's super high. So though there's always something very intense, there's less oxygen to breathe, the movement is slower, and it's like people don't live in the surface, but they live always, what happens in the surface is not precisely what happens outside. And I don't think that is hysteric. I think that is Mexico City's. While there are other parts of Mexico where everything is so explosive, so let's say in the skin, but Mexico City is very different. Now, if I was going to put hysteria in any place of Mexico City, honestly, I don't know where to place it. I guess that it happens in several newsrooms at the same time because it's the reality so, and then I would place hysteria. And maybe No, it's not good. It's not a good parameter, a parallel, because then they have to write, and to write they can't deliver that same hysteria, though they sometimes do. So maybe in some newsrooms I would place a hysteria. But I do think that is a good word to describe what was happening to Anna at the very end. Though, as we know, that word is very imprecise. So it was not precisely hysteria, but it was what some people would call hysteria. She was off. She was off with a little help of her friend, the opium that was taking all the night. So it's a kind of off that permitted her, in my fantasy, I think, to rewrite her book in such an erotic manner.
And I think we have time for just one last question from Alberto, who says, can you talk briefly about the translation process of the novel? And perhaps, Samantha, if you'd like to speak to it too, but maybe first Carmen, the process of translating.
I am going to take the voice of Samantha, if she permits me. Sam, dear. Oh, you are there, Samantha. Translating is rewriting. And she's a terrific writer. And she rewrote the book. She asked me some things sometimes that I let her ask me. We are friends, so even though if she doesn't ask me, she's asking me and I'm asking her. I think it's an extraordinary thing that has been built through the years, the kind of professional and also intimate relationship that permits her use the book and rewrite and find perfectly the tone. I was only looking at what she was doing like this, not at the beginning. It was like, it's always like saying, what's going to happen? But she did a terrific job, and it is for me a gift. But it's not what you, Alberto, asked. Alberto wanted Samantha to say a word.
A little bit, we had a lot of fun, Carmen and I, doing an interview for the Southwest Review. And I did a little Proust questionnaire for Carmen. And we talked about this experience of sharing a text so intimately. And I said it's a little bit like being a vampire, because as a writer, you are, you're using this other writer's material, but then you're recreating it. And, that's part of the reason that I love working with Carmen, because it's always a wild ride. Like, you don't know if you're getting the story of Carmen in Mexico with the revolution, or if you're getting the opium-fueled fairy tale from the manuscript that Anna wrote. And it's like that with all of your work, Carmen. Everything is different and it's never predictable. And that's why I love reading it, and that's why I love translating it.
It's a beautiful novel. I really like this one. So I think that when all is said and done, people should just give themselves a treat and read it.
And the link to buy the book from us is in the chat. Phillip, thank you. Samantha, thank you. And Carmen, of course, thank you too. Congratulations on the publication of the Book of Anna here in English from Coffee House Press. And thank you to everybody for joining us. This was really a lot of fun. And keep an eye on McNallyJackson.com to see more events like this. In the meantime, be well, be safe, and just thank you all again. Phillip.
Gracias, muchas gracias. Gracias, Philip, gracias. And gracias so much to all of you that came to celebrate the book. Se los agradezco mucho. Muchos abrazos with no distance. I can tell you, I am hugging you all with no distance at what Zoom gives us here. Muchas gracias. Nave, gracias todos. Gracias. Alberto, querido.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.